7 days into the Syrian desert, the dust of a violent pursuit finally settles over the high, rocky ridges of Mount Gilead. Laban the Aramean has brought a militia of his kinsmen across the sand, hunting the sudden, silent departure of Jacob, his daughters, and his grandchildren. But before Laban can draw a blade or arrange his men for a dawn ambush, the dark of his tent is breached. The Creator of the universe does not send an angel to stop this caravan. He steps into the Aramean's sleep himself with a restriction that defies human logic. He does not tell Laban to surrender his weapons. He tells him to paralyze his tongue. Stop right there. Genesis chapter 31, verse 24, gives us the exact midnight interception. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. Picture it. A heavily armed camp waiting for daylight to overtake a fleeing family. Yet the God of Abraham does not warn Laban against using his sword, his spear, or the sheer force of his men. The divine warning is entirely, exclusively about what Laban is permitted to vocalize. Read that again. Either good or bad. It is a strange, absolute paralysis of language. Why does the Almighty physically intercept a furious uncle in the dark? Just to dictate his vocabulary? What kind of dark gravity was Laban carrying in his mouth that God had to block it before the sun came up? To understand what is actually happening on this mountain, we cannot read Laban as merely a bitter, swindled shepherd mourning his lost livestock. We have to read him the way the ancient Jewish world remembered him. The Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, an ancient Aramaic translation and commentary of the Torah, preserves a terrifying memory of Laban's true profession and the items he kept hidden in the shadows of his home. See the scene on the mountain. Laban is not just a patriarch holding a grudge. He is a man who deals in unseen currencies. Jacob had fled with Laban's daughters and Laban's flocks. But there is a third theft, buried deep inside the woven saddles of the fleeing caravan, that has actually provoked this massive desert manhunt. A physical object, a set of objects. Actually, that Laban is so desperate to recover, he has marched an army across a wasteland. The phrase either good or bad is an English translation of a Hebrew concept that implies total, binding restriction over blessing and cursing. Laban has brought an authority with him that requires spoken words to activate. 2 camps, 1 mountain, 1 divine gag order. Jacob is sleeping just a few miles away, completely unaware that his father-in-law has arrived with the spiritual equivalent of a loaded weapon, and God has just dismantled the trigger. The warning in the dream was not a metaphor, but a literal command holding back an ancient, dark mechanism. Yet the text leaves a massive question hanging in the cold desert air. If Laban's words were truly that dangerous, what exact authority was the Aramean preparing to invoke over the bloodline of Israel? Dawn breaks over the ridges of Mount Gilead. Laban steps into the camp of Israel, heavily armed, backed by a militia of his kinsmen. He has the numbers, he has the terrain, but he is walking as a man entirely bound in chains. Listen to the very first words he speaks when he finally stands face to face with the man he has hunted for 7 days. Genesis 31-29. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt, but the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. Stop right there. Laban admits he has the physical capacity to slaughter Jacob's camp. The swords are drawn, the men are ready, yet he is completely paralyzed. And his paralysis is tied exclusively to the Hebrew phrase mitov adra, from good to bad. Read that again. This is not a divine command to practice polite conversation. In the ancient Near East, the phrase to speak good or bad is an idiom of absolute legal and spiritual jurisdiction. It is the language of kings issuing decrees. It is the language of seers pronouncing irreversible fate. To speak good or bad over someone was to dictate their reality, to bind them under a spoken law. Watch what the text does. God does not tell Laban to lower his weapons. God tells Laban his jurisdiction over Jacob's bloodline has been revoked. He cannot bless him, and more importantly, he cannot curse him. A curse, in the world of the patriarchs, was not a mere insult. It was a targeted, spiritual munition. A spoken hex designed to ruin crops, close wombs, and sever a man from divine protection. Laban believed he possessed the authority to speak death over the seed of Abraham. God intercepted him in the dark to dismantle the weapon in his throat. Sit with that. I hold this as their understanding of spiritual warfare, not as a modern metaphor. Words altered the physical world. And Laban was not an amateur in the manipulation of the unseen. He is furious, but he is compliant. He understands the rules of this architecture. He cannot cross the boundary of the gag order, but the sheer arrogance of Laban's pursuit reveals a terrifying undercurrent to this family dispute. The Syrian uncle did not just view himself as a wronged father or an aggrieved shepherd. He viewed himself as a man holding genuine spiritual leverage. He had brought his army, yes, but he was also hunting for the very instruments of his dark craft, the physical tools he relied on to see beyond the veil. Jacob assumes Laban is angry about stolen wages. Jacob has no idea he has just triggered a massive crisis in the dark arts of Aramea. We are left staring at an Aramean warlord who genuinely believed he possessed the spiritual authority to curse the bloodline of Israel. To understand the root of that dark confidence, the text forces us to look back at the exact Hebrew word Laban used to build his wealth back in Haran. What was the uncle of Jacob actively practicing in the shadows of his own house? 14 years before the standoff on Mount Gilead, inside the mud-brick walls of Haran, Laban the Aramean made a quiet, terrifying confession to his nephew. Jacob had just asked to leave. He had served his time for Rachel and Leah, and he wanted to return to the land of Canaan, but Laban panicked. He refused to let the bloodline walk out of his camp. Genesis chapter 30, verse 27, records Laban's exact response. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. Stop right there. The King James English softens the uncle into a pragmatic businessman. I have learned by experience. It sounds like a man reviewing his accounting ledgers, noticing his flocks have multiplied since Jacob arrived. But strip away the English and look at the raw Hebrew burning underneath that phrase. The Hebrew word translated as learned by experience is nachash. It does not mean to observe agricultural trends. Nachash means to practice divination, to enchant, to hiss or whisper incantations. It is the exact same root word used for the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Read that again. Laban is not checking spreadsheets. He is consulting the dark arts. He is telling Jacob, to his face, I have practiced sorcery. I have read the omens, and my divination tells me your God is the source of my wealth. Watch what the text does. Laban is exposed not as a greedy herdsman, but as a practicing occultist. He uses witchcraft to track his assets. He uses divination to map out the spiritual grid of his household. Haran, his home city, was an ancient hub for moon worship and the dark arts. Laban is operating deep within that system. Same root, same darkness. When you realize Laban is a sorcerer, the 7-day desert pursuit suddenly changes shape. Laban did not track Jacob's caravan across 300 miles of shifting sand merely by looking for camel tracks. He used nachash. He used the omens to find them. But there was a problem. A sudden, massive blind spot in his magic. When Laban finally catches Jacob on the high ridges of Gilead, he makes a strange, frantic accusation. He completely bypasses the stolen flocks. He ignores the lost wages. He focuses entirely on a single, missing asset. Genesis 31-30. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longedst after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? Picture it. A warlord with an army, ignoring a fortune in livestock, demanding the return of his household idols. The Teraphim. These were the instruments of his Nachash, the physical hardware of his divination. He has marched a militia across the wasteland, not to recover sheep, but to recover his spiritual sight. Jacob stands accused, having absolutely no idea what Laban is talking about. But someone in Jacob's camp does. The Teraphim are currently hidden in the dark, buried under a saddle. But what exactly are these objects that an Aramean sorcerer would risk a desert war to get them back? Laban ignores the bleating of thousands of sheep. The wealth of a lifetime is standing right in front of him, on the high ridges of Gilead, and the Aramean warlord does not demand a single lamb back. He demands the Teraphim. Genesis 31-32 gives us the chilling, fatal response from the patriarch of Israel. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Before our brethren discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. Stop right there. Jacob has just pronounced a death sentence over the woman he loves most in the world. Picture it. Two men circling each other on a rocky ridge, backed by their respective camps. Jacob is deeply insulted. He has worked 20 years under the crushing heat and freezing nights of Haran. He knows his hands are clean. He believes Laban is bluffing, creating a pretext to search his tents and humiliate him in front of his brethren. But Laban is not bluffing. Laban is desperate. Watch what the text does. God intercepted Laban in the dark to prevent the Aramean from speaking a curse over the bloodline of Israel. The Almighty locked Laban's jaw, restricting him from speaking either good or bad. But God did not silence Jacob. And in his blind, righteous anger, the patriarch of Israel does exactly what the sorcerer was forbidden to do. He speaks death into his own camp. Let him not live. Words alter the physical world. Jacob has unknowingly placed a legal, spiritual bounty on his own wife's head. And Laban immediately takes the invitation, beginning a ruthless, tent-by-tent hunt for his missing property. But why the panic? The English word idols or gods betrays the terrifying reality of what is actually missing from Laban's house. We picture small, primitive wooden carvings, quiet, powerless totems sitting on a dusty shelf. But Laban's manic desperation tells a completely different story. If the Teraphim were merely carved wood, Laban could have whittled new ones. If they were simply cast in silver or gold, he possessed the wealth to melt down 100 more. You do not march a heavily armed Aramean militia 300 miles across, shifting sand for replaceable trinkets. You do not risk a desert war over wood and stone. You march an army because the Teraphim were singular, irreplaceable artifacts. They were the physical engines of Laban's Nachash. Sit with that. These objects were not passive representations of a deity. In the ancient Near Eastern mind, the Teraphim were active, functioning devices. They were the spiritual receivers Laban used to survey the unseen world. They gave him the tactical advantage he used to build his empire, to track his flocks, and to manipulate his household. And now, his network has gone completely dark. Stolen by someone inside his own bloodline, Jacob stands completely exposed. He has confidently drawn a line in the sand, inviting a ruthless sorcerer to tear apart his family's tents. entirely unaware that Rachel is sitting on the very objects that have triggered this manhunt. The death sentence is hanging in the air. To understand the sheer panic driving Laban's search, we have to look past the canonical text and open the ancient Jewish records. We have to look at how a teraphim was actually manufactured in the ancient Aramean world, because these specific idols were not carved from cedar, and they were not poured from bronze. Jacob has staked his wife's life on a set of objects he believes are entirely worthless. But Laban knows exactly what is hidden under the saddle, and the ancient rabbis preserved the horrifying recipe of its creation. What exactly was buried in the dark of Rachel's tent? Genesis chapter 31, verse 33, drops us directly into the middle of a frantic, tearing search. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Watch what the text does. It tracks the physical movement of an Aramean warlord as he violently dismantles the camp of Israel. He is moving from shadow to shadow. He is throwing aside woven blankets, tipping over clay jars, stepping over pure silver and gold. He is not searching for stolen wages. He is hunting for an object that simply cannot be replaced. The Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, the ancient Aramaic commentary of the Torah, records exactly what Laban was looking for, and it was not a wooden doll. The ancient rabbis recorded that a functional teraphim, the engine of Aramaean dark arts, was constructed through an act of supreme violence. The recipe is horrifying. To create the oracle, a sorcerer would take a firstborn male, slaughter him, and sever the head from the body. They would salt the flesh, treat the skin with preserving spices and heavy oils, and write an invocation of dark spirits on a thin plate of solid gold. Picture it. They would place that inscribed gold plate under the tongue of the severed head. They would mount the skull in a hollow place in the wall of the house and light candles before it in the dark. And then the dead would speak. The oracle of bone would answer the sorcerer's questions, revealing the unseen, tracking the lost, giving the practitioner total surveillance over his territory. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. Test it the way the Bereans tested everything, but this was the ancient Jewish memory of what the teraphim actually were. This was Laban's Nahash. This was the literal camera feed he used to build his empire. The voice in the dark that told him where his flocks were, who was deceiving him, and how to maintain his iron grip on the region. And now, the head of the firstborn is gone. Sit with that. Laban is not searching for a religious trinket. He is hunting for the macabre, necromantic hardware that gave him his spiritual sight. Without it, he is utterly blind. And right now, he is tearing through the camp, completely unaware that Jacob has just pronounced a patriarchal death sentence over whoever is hiding it. Genesis 31-34 gives us the terrifying location of the missing oracle. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them, and Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. Same desert, same darkness. Rachel is sitting directly on top of the severed head, but this creates a massive theological collision. Rachel is the matriarch of Israel, the beloved of Jacob, the mother of Joseph. Why would a woman of the covenant steal a necromantic artifact of the Aramean occult? If she simply wanted to worship a pagan god, she could have carved one from stone on the journey. A matriarch is hiding a severed oracle under a camel's saddle, with a death sentence hanging over her head. But an older text reveals she was not acting out of idolatry, but out of absolute, calculated spiritual warfare. What did Rachel know about her father's magic that forced her to steal the one thing that could get her killed? Inside the heavy, stifling heat of a goat hair tent, a woman sits perfectly still on a woven camel's saddle. She can hear the violent, methodical tearing of her family's camp just a few yards away. Laban has already gutted Jacob's tent. He has torn through the sanctuary of Leah. He has dismantled the spaces of the handmaids. Now, the heavy flap of Rachel's doorway is thrown back, and the Aramean warlord steps inside, staring directly at his daughter. Genesis 31-35 gives us the chilling, brilliant maneuver that saves the bloodline of Israel. And she said to her father, "Let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me." And he searched, but found not the images. Stop right there. Why would a matriarch of the covenant risk her life to possess the dark, severed oracle of her father? The Book of Jasher, an ancient historical text, referenced twice by the canonical writers of Joshua and 2 Samuel, provides the exact tactical motive. Jasher records that Rachel did not take the idols out of a lingering pagan devotion. She stole them to blind her father. I hold this as one tradition's record, a window into how the ancient world understood the patriarchs. Jasher explains that Rachel knew exactly how Laban tracked his enemies. She knew the moment Jacob's caravan disappeared into the night, her father would walk into the shadows of his house, light the candles, and consult the Teraphim. The necromantic oracle would whisper the exact coordinates of their desert route. Rachel did not steal a religious trinket. She cut the camera feed of her father's witchcraft. Picture it. She has shoved the engine of an Aramean occultist under her saddle, and now he is standing inches away from it. But her defense mechanism goes even deeper than simple concealment. She tells Laban she cannot stand because the custom of women is upon me. We read this as a clever, desperate lie to avoid being searched. But watch what the text does in the ancient cultural context. Read that again. In the ancient Near East, the menstrual cycle carried heavy ritual impurity. It was believed to instantly neutralize and defile sacred or occult objects by sitting directly on the physical hardware of Laban's divination and announcing her condition. Rachel is not just hiding the oracle, she is actively short-circuiting it. She is desecrating the dark magic, rendering the battery completely inert. Sit with that. Laban accepts the excuse. He cannot touch her, and he cannot force her up without defiling himself and his remaining spiritual authority. The sorcerer is completely checkmated by his own daughter. He turns around and walks out of the tent, utterly defeated, completely blind. The Teraphim remain buried in the dark, permanently silenced. The immediate physical threat is over. Laban walks out of the tent with empty hands, completely severed from his dark network. But the unseen architecture of this mountain is still highly volatile, because while Laban's mouth was bound by God, a patriarchal death sentence still hovers over the woman sitting on the saddle. Laban walks out of the goat hair tent with empty hands. The Aramean warlord is completely defeated, severed from his dark network, standing blind in the dust of Mount Gilead. And the moment the sorcerer concedes the search, the patriarch of Israel erupts. Genesis 31-36 records the explosion. And Jacob was wroth, and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, "What is my trespass? What is my sin, that thou hast so hotly pursued after me?" Stop right there. Jacob is entirely justified in the physical realm. He unleashes 2 decades of righteous, blistering anger on his uncle. He recounts the freezing nights and the burning days of Haran. He lists the torn animals he paid for out of his own pocket. He exposes the 10 times his wages were altered. Then he drives the final theological nail into Laban's pride. Genesis 31-42. "Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, had been with me. Surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God hath seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. Picture it. Jacob is standing tall, vindicated, throwing God's midnight interception directly into the sorcerer's face. But Jacob is completely blind to the spiritual reality radiating from the camel's saddle just a few yards away. He does not know what Rachel has buried. And more terrifyingly, he does not understand the weight of the words that just left his own mouth before the search began. Read that again. Let him not live. God came to Laban in the midnight dark to bind the Aramean's tongue. Laban was forbidden to speak a curse over the bloodline, but the enemy of that bloodline is patient. If the sorcerer cannot speak the hex, the enemy will orchestrate a scenario where the patriarch of the covenant speaks it over his own house. Watch what the text does. In the ancient world, the spoken word of a patriarch was not a suggestion. It was a binding legal decree. When Isaac blindly blessed Jacob, he could not take it back. Even when he realized Esau had been cheated, the word had gone out. It had altered reality. Jacob has just spoken a death sentence over Rachel. And while she survived the physical search on Mount Gilead, the spiritual munition had already been fired. I hold this as the solemn understanding of the ancient rabbis. A thread they traced through the heartbreak of the Torah. They taught that Jacob's curse did not fall to the ground. It simply waited in the air. Same family, same dark consequence. Look down the timeline to Genesis 35. The caravan is moving toward Bethlehem. Rachel goes into hard labor. And on the side of the road, in the dust of Canaan, the curse finally catches up to the saddle. Rachel dies, giving birth to Benjamin, burying her life in the dirt, just a short distance from the promised destination. The matriarch who brilliantly outsmarted the Aramean sorcerer could not outrun the spoken decree of her own husband. Sit with that. The words of the covenant carrier held a gravity that Laban's dark arts could only dream of. Jacob's ignorance protected his pride on the mountain, but it cost him the love of his life in the valley. But right now, on the high ridges of Gilead, the death is still years away. The immediate threat is an Aramean army standing nervously in the camp. The missing Teraphim have not been found. The divination is permanently broken. The two men are standing at a total stalemate. And Laban realizes he cannot touch this family. The warlord is stripped, blind, and bound by the God of Abraham. There is only one thing left for him to do before he turns his camels back to Syria. How do you make peace with an enemy when your magic has completely failed? The sorcerer has nothing left. His divination is broken, his teraphim are silenced, and his mouth is bound by the creator of the universe. He cannot curse Jacob, and he cannot kill him. Genesis 31-44 records the only maneuver Laban has left. Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. Stop right there. This is not a treaty of friendship. It is a spiritual quarantine. Jacob takes a stone and sets it up as a pillar. He tells his brethren to gather more stones, and they build a massive heap on the high ridges of Gilead. Laban names it in Aramaic Jegar Sahadutha. Jacob names it in Hebrew Galid. 2 languages, 2 bloodlines, 1 permanent border. Listen to the exact terms Laban dictates in verse 52. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and that thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. Picture it. The Aramean warlord is drawing a physical line in the dirt that his dark magic is never allowed to cross. The seed of Israel is moving south toward the promised land, and the occult practices of Haran are being locked to the north. The boundary of stones is the official geological seal over Laban's jurisdiction. I hold this as one reading, not the final word. But when you read the text with the ancient eyes of the rabbis, This is not just a family dispute settling over a pile of rocks. It is the disarmament of an ancient, dark weapon. Go back now to the opening image of this film, the dust of a 7-day desert pursuit, the heavily armed camp waiting for daylight, the dark tent of the Aramean warlord. You have read that midnight visitation 100 times, picturing a greedy uncle getting a stern warning about stolen sheep. But tonight, that desert looks entirely different. When God stepped into the dark and told Laban to speak neither good nor bad, he was not giving a lesson in manners. He was stepping directly into the crosshairs of an active, necromantic curse, physically dismantling the spell before it could touch the patriarch of Israel. God was defending a man who didn't even know he was in a spiritual war. Laban wakes up the next morning, kisses his daughters, and turns his camels back toward Syria. He rides away empty-handed, leaving the Teraphim buried in the dirt of Rachel's tent. But the desert is still holding the rest of the mystery, because the text never tells us what Laban did when he finally returned to the shadows of Haran. Did he slaughter another firstborn? Did he build a new oracle of bone? We do not know. If you made it to the end of this journey, comment the word "watched" below. Subscribe to the channel, because we are going to keep pulling back the English translations to read the dark, unseen architecture beneath the text. And before you close this video, send it to one specific person who loves the mysteries of Genesis, but has never heard the terrifying truth about Laban's stolen gods. The heap of stones still stands in the text, marking the exact ridge where the magic of the East broke against the midnight word of God.